Welcome back to the Body Composition Coach podcast, and today I think will be a little bit of a shorter one. Now, the subject I want to talk about is just as important as every other subject that I talk about, but I think I can cover this off in a reasonably short space of time. So let's see how we get on. I'll try not to go off on any tangents. But before we get started, if you are enjoying the podcast at this point, we're into series 2 now. If you're enjoying the podcast, if you're learning something from it, if you're taking value from it, you will never understand how valuable to me leaving some feedback, leaving me a 5-star review is. So look, thousands of you listen to this podcast, tens of you leave reviews and like 5 stars or just a comment saying, this was great, enjoyed this. It means the world because it helps more people to find this podcast and listen to it. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking, do you know what? John has provided me some value, all for free, all just kind of sitting talking about his experience and his knowledge, please just support this and give it a like, subscribe, give it a 5-star review, just leave a little comment. It genuinely goes so far to helping other people find this podcast. But look, let's get into the short episode that I promised you. So what I want to talk about today is protein, right? And not in the way that you think I'm going to talk about it, because you'll have heard this all before. You'll have heard how, yes, you need to be eating more protein. You need to be tracking your protein. You need to know exactly what your protein is. And it's completely true. Like 100% is completely true. And the reality is for most people listening to this podcast, they probably still don't eat enough protein. Now, if you want some rough numbers, I'll give you them 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So if I'm going to do some very easy maths here, I'm just over 80 kilos, but let's say 80 kilos as a bit of a benchmark here. For me, I will generally eat around 180 grams of protein a day. That's just because double that is 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is 160 grams of protein. I will just kind of overshoot that a little bit and go to generally 180 as a minimum. Now for you, if you weigh 60 kilograms, generally you want to be looking at 120 plus really. It does depend. Obviously, if you're deep in a fat loss phase, you might go like 110 and whatever. That would take you down to maybe like 1.7, 1.8 grams per kilo of body weight. But look, somewhere in that 1.6 to 2.2 grams of body weight every day. And I don't just mean, and like this is a really common thing I see recently is like, oh God, I eat loads of protein. But do you? Like genuinely do you? Because just saying you eat loads of protein because you've got some protein yogurts in the fridge and you have chicken with your dinner, that doesn't actually mean you eat enough protein. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about whether you eat enough protein or don't eat enough protein. Generally, yes, make sure you're eating enough protein first and foremost. But the message today is actually a little bit different, because one of the things that I've noticed is almost like this halo effect of protein. This belief now within the fitness industry and people who are trying to get in shape and build muscle and lose fat, that protein is like the holy grail of everything. And it kind of is, in terms of like, it's going to help you build muscle if you're doing the correct strength training, goes without saying. But also it's going to help you like feel full for longer. There's a thermic effect of food. I don't know if I've talked about it on a podcast before, but in very short summary, thermic effect of food is that you actually burn 20% of the calories from the protein you eat in breaking it down, because it's a little bit more difficult for your body to break down in a good way. It's just a bit more challenging for your body to break it down. So it burns calories from even eating it. So like there's loads of added benefits to that. Ultimately, protein is not this thing that as long as you're eating enough protein, you are healthy, you are going to build loads of muscle, you're going to get to the amazing physique that you want. Like everything else plays a part too, right? And that's what I want to talk about today. So the halo effect of protein is people buy protein bars, they buy protein yogurts, they build all their dinners around their protein and their lunches and their breakfast around protein. And that's great. But what about calories? What about carbohydrates? What about fats? Like, what about those things? Because I've had a few cases recently of new clients who join us, who come in, they'll speak with me. They're like, John, do you know what? I'm nailing it because I'm hitting all my protein. I'm absolutely killing it. And then I'll talk to them about their gym performance. I'm like, okay, what about your gym performance? And look, let's get beyond the fact that they're probably not training as efficiently, as effectively as I'd like them to be. But we work on that. What they'll start to tell me is, oh yeah, some days I go in and just really fatigued and really struggling, or like some days I go in and I'm giving it everything I've got, but I just can't lift as much as I did the week before or before that. And it starts to highlight some real issues for me, that maybe they are nailing their protein, but they're neglecting the other side of things, like their carbohydrates, for example. Now, a couple of things that are really important to establish here is your gym performance will be driven almost solely by carbohydrates. The energy that you can put into your lifts, the output that you're then going to get from that session is pretty much solely down to your carbohydrate intake, but also your carbohydrate timing. Let's say, for example, you are on a really low carb diet. I'm not against low carb diets at times, but you can probably expect your performance generally to drop off because you are going to need those carbohydrates to be training at the intensity required to be building muscle. So one thing that then I see is this halo effect of protein that leads to a lack of carbohydrates, which then means that gym performance is down and suffering. And what's the knock-on effect of gym performance being down and suffering? Well, you don't progressively overload, or you can't train to the intensity required. Therefore, you don't build the muscle required. And this is where we end up getting lost, because you're eating enough protein, and the assumption is this halo effect of protein that, well, I'm eating enough protein, so I'm building muscle. And then 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line, nothing's changed. And that's simply because, yes, you've been eating enough protein. You haven't been training with the intensity or intent required because you haven't been eating enough carbohydrates. You haven't been overloading your lifts to the extent that you could have done because you haven't been eating carbohydrates. And this isn't an effort thing. So before you listen to this and think, well, no, I couldn't work any harder than I do, that's irrelevant. Like the effort you put in is actually irrelevant. It's about output. So the input is your effort. The output is the actual weight that you're able to lift or the performance you're able to give. And whether you put effort in or not is irrelevant. If your body doesn't have the tools required to give the output that you need, it's irrelevant. So this whole thing of like, well, I put effort in, so that's fine, is not fine. You need to be eating carbohydrates to fuel your workout. Now, one of the things that I talk about quite a lot with my clients is carbohydrate timing. Having the carbohydrates available to do your workout and basing your carbohydrates mainly around your workout is really key. Now, I train at 5:30 in the morning. It actually makes it quite difficult for me to have carbohydrates like an hour or 2 hours before I train, which is generally the advice. For me, I would just make sure I have reasonably high amount of carbs in my evening meal so that when I get up in the morning, I'm fueled and I'm ready to go. That's fine. Like, you can do that. The same thing, my breakfast is usually high carb or contains carbs. It's usually oats and protein. So I'll then have that when I get back from the gym. So my workout has been surrounded by carbohydrates. So the workout that's the meal that's actually furthest away from my training session is my lunch. That's kind of in the middle, right? So I'll have probably a lower carb lunch generally. So I'll get most of my carbs around my workout. That's fine. Like, that's all you need to do. It doesn't need to be like, oh, I need to have, this specific carb-based snack an hour before I train, so I'm going to need to get up a little bit earlier. You don't have to do that. Just make sure you're kind of pushing your carbs to around your training session in some way. That's going to help you perform better. And in performing better, you're actually going to build more muscle. As long as you're still, you still have to be having sufficient protein. So don't go away from this episode thinking, cool, forget about protein. It's actually all about carbs. It's not. It's still about protein in terms of having the building blocks to build muscle. But if you don't have sufficient level of carbohydrates, you will not perform to the standard required, the intensity and the intent required. So therefore, you will not build the muscle anyway, no matter how much protein you're eating. The second thing, or the second part of this podcast, is fats, right? And this is something I specifically see in female clients. Female clients who have lost their period in the past, whether that's before they've come to me or during or whatever, it generally usually comes down to their fat intake. The science tells us a couple of conflicting things. The science tells us that energy intake is probably the main driver of hormone dysfunction, but also there is a lot of science too that backs up fats playing the biggest role in hormone function. So when we then start to take into account, okay, you're going to be in a calorie deficit, you're going to be losing weight, that's fine. If we want to look after you the best we possibly can during that, you're eating loads of protein, you're keeping hold of your muscle mass and you're eating loads of protein and whatever. You're now eating your carbs and you're fueling your workouts the best you can in a deficit. But then you got to think about your fats. And women generally, I don't know why, maybe it's like dieting culture kind of remaining from previous years. Women generally tend to get enough fats in, or they're a little bit scared of fats. And therefore their hormones dysregulate very, very quickly. Therefore they'll lose their cycle, or their mood will change drastically, or they will feel like extra hungry or extra tired or extra fatigued because they're not actually fueling themselves with fats. So you can see the picture I'm building here is, yes, protein's important, but when you put a halo effect on protein and all you focus on is protein, training performance drops, muscle building then drops, hormone dysfunction comes in, you lose your cycle, you feel more fatigued. What's the knock-on effect of feeling more fatigued and hormone dysfunction? Well, you're probably more hungry, you're probably sleeping worse, All of these different things start to kick in. What does that then do? Well, it makes it more difficult to do the steps that you need to do every day. It makes it difficult to have the daily movement and what we call NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is how much, like when I'm talking to my hands now, how much I'm moving. All of these things downregulate. What ends up happening is that female clients specifically, it could be men as well, but generally with females mostly, is that like 1,200 calorie deficit that they thought they were in, actually they've got to go to 1,200, 1,100, 1,000. They've got to go really low then with their calories because everything's downregulating. The best thing you can do when it comes to a calorie deficit or losing fat and building muscle is absolutely eat enough protein. But my God, do not forget about the other things, because this is where most people end up going wrong. They think they've cracked it because they're eating enough protein. They then miss out on carbohydrate intake. They miss out on fat intake. The impact of that either ruins their deficit or ruins their ability to build muscle. Therefore, whether they're wanting to recomposition or whether they're trying to lose weight and keep hold of their muscle or whether they're just trying to build muscle, all of these things go south. So listen, hopefully you've enjoyed that slightly different take on protein and the focuses you should have around protein. As I said at the start, please leave me a 5-star review. Please let me know your thoughts and your comments and what you think to what I've just talked about. Are you finding that you're having some of these problems? Have you thought about some of the stuff that I've said? And as always, I'd love to work with you guys if you are looking for some help, some more specific help in fixing the problems that you have, whether that's training, whether that's nutrition, whether that's mindset, whether that is an identity-based issue or you're struggling to lose the body fat or build the muscle that you wanted to build and you've been trying for a long time, you've been trying for years, but it just is not coming off. Go to the link in my Instagram bio. You can apply to work with us there. I'd love to hear from you. But in the meantime, leave me that review, leave me that comment, and I'll see you in the next episode.